today's presentation, I would like to talk about Alphonse Montandon, who was the only watchmaker, Montandon watchmaker, to sign his watches Travers. Now, Alphonse, until very recently, his identity had not been 100% established. However, as a result of information from various state documents, we are able to verify almost with 100% accuracy the actual maker who signed his watches, Alphonse Montandon à Travers. Now, Alphonse was a Montandon de Travers. This is the genealogical branch of the mountains, and he was primarily during the 1840s, late 1840s, throughout the 1850s and early 1860s, we see him mentioned in Davoine almanacs for his watches, and he's mentioned as seated in à Travers. Now, most of his watches that we have today are gold, and these are key wind, key set cylinder pieces. He does have one quite elaborate watch, which is with multiple complications, and this is extremely rare. It's the only one I have seen. However, his watches tend to be quite thin with cylinder escapements, and let us look at one particular example. This is a gold cylinder movement, a cylinder escapement, and I will provide some close-ups. This watch is quite typical of his watchmaking. Now, on the reverse side, we have a very beautiful sailboat motif, which is engraved on the watch very beautifully. This is a very thin profile watch, and this is dating to approximately the late 1840s, perhaps the early 1850s. And this particular watch is unique in having come through the ages with its original case, which we find here. Now, it is, as I mentioned, a key wind key set, and we have very delicate original key for this piece, which is an added bonus. So Alphonse, I would like to show some documents about him which reveal his identity, how that was established, as this is quite important in documentation for posterity's sake, but to actually understand who the makers were. And I should state that in attempting to locate him, he was quite difficult case to determine with accuracy the actual maker. A primary source of our information is genealogical information in Les Montandon, which is written by Frederick J. Montandon in 1913. And this has over 600 years of family history. And actually, the maker who turned out to be the candidate, the prime candidate, it's not even mentioned in this book that he is actually or was a watchmaker. The other two, and there were three Alphonses, the other two Alphonse, and they're also in Travers Valley. One was a maker of balances, fabricant de balancier, and he is not our Alphonse. And the other Alphonse was a Felix Alphonse. Now, he also lived in Travers at this time. He was born 8 years after our maker, and he was a junior, but he most likely, in this small village of several hundred people, he would have most likely actually have been working with this cousin, Alphonse Montandon. So even though he isn't the maker that we had originally sought, or that he isn't the maker that it turned out to be the one signing Alphonse. He most likely did participate in the watchmaking with the actual Alphonse. So let us now turn to some of the genealogical information which I should present to you. Now, turning to the genealogical information on Alphonse Montandon, we do have, and it should be stated that we are also relying on Davoine almanacs, and we do find that there is Alphonse Montandon is listed in Travers between 1847 and 1866, and he's listed as a fabricant de horlogerie and also as an établisseur. Now, this établisseur term is actually the key to deciphering the actual identity of Alphonse, as this is the person, this term relates to the person who is in business and puts their names on the watches. So he's establishing watches. Now, with regards to the genealogical information, we do have in Frederick Jules Montandon's Les Montandons from 1913, under Montandon de Travers, genealogical branch, we do see in the Rameau de Christ, this is the Book of Christ, this is a sub-branch in Montandon de Travers, we do see a Alphonse listed, and he is 1820 to 1895 are his dates, and the only reference in Les Montandons is that he is the author of a brochure on the fire of Travers, and is dated 1865. Now, other searches reveal that he has also written about village life in Travers, and very little information. But Montandon book genealogy has absolutely zero information that this individual is or was a watchmaker. Now, with regard to his father was a fabricant. However, he was not in the watch business. His father was the owner of an asphalt mine in Travers, and that was under Montandon et Jean Reynaud. And they also were working with the so-called dentelle, which is this Swiss lace, which is quite excellent in its quality, and also was exported and enjoyed a quite big following. But the other son of Henri Francois is Louis Edouard. Now, Louis Edouard, we know that he was a businessman. At one point, he was in the United States. He traded in cotton, exporting from the United States, and very probably watches or some other Swiss commodities from Switzerland to the U.S. However, Louis Edouard, and he mainly went by the name of Edouard, would also later be quite well known. Now, this business opportunities that he was pursuing was in the late 1830s and the 1840s. But by 1848, he did become a member of the provisional government in Neuchâtel, and he later continued as a politician, being a counselor of state, and he was also the director of public works. So his profile is rather elevated, and we can tell that this is a very rich and powerful family. So this should be a clue as to this watchmaker Alphonse, even though his information is not specifically mentioned here. Obviously, this was a business, this watchmaking, putting one's name on a watch and having subcontractors often do various parts. This is all part of that business in establishing watches. Now, let us continue with the other Alphonse, and this is also a Montandon de Travers, also in Travers. However, he was born in 1828, and this was of this Alphonse Montandon of the subbranch Montandon des Huillons. So once again, they were cousins, and this other Alphonse, now his actual name is Felix Alphonse, and he was married to a Sophie Borel, who had a business of her own associated with watch-related industry, very possibly watch tools, but perhaps fineries that went inside the watches as well. But Les Montandon specifically states that Félix Alphonse is horloger à Travers. So this much information we did have. And the third Alphonse Montandon was a fabricant de balancier, but he was born much later, in the 1830s. Now, he was born in 1834, and he was the son of Frédéric Montandon. So the key moment in determining this watchmaker, his actual identity, was the revelation of an 1858 list of electoral college list for the Electoral College of Travers. Now, this is unique, this document, that it appears to be the only one of its kind. However, it specifically has the names of the individuals that are electors, and it also has their professions, their locations or addresses often, but also their birth dates or birth years. And when we look at the College of Travers, we have Montandon Alphonse, fils Henri François. And then we have the second Alphonse, which is Alphonse, fils Frédéric. And then we have Montandon Alphonse with no mention of the father. However, the birth years are the key. We have Alphonse, fils Henri François, 1820. And his profession is specifically listed as établisseur. Therefore, this is enough information to help us determine that this particular Alphonse, who was born in 1820, is the one who was signing watches, Alphonse Montandon à Travers. This was a very small village and continues to be. We're talking about perhaps 200, somewhere in several hundreds, a population. Obviously, these close relatives were probably working together. The younger Alphonse, Félix Alphonse, was probably doing a lot of the casework or various fine-tuning. It's hard to say exactly what his specialization was. However, this electoral list does mention for him, for Félix Alphonse, also only called Alphonse, merely his profession as horloger. Now, this is watchmaker, and this is a very general term, and this is much less specific than the établisseur. Now, the next rank below établisseur, or perhaps on the same level even, this would be horloger, or rather fabricant de horlogerie. This is somebody who's actually producing, responsible for a large section of the production. So now, in this list, Alphonse, fils Frédéric, who was born in 1834, he is only mentioned as the horloger. However, in Davoine manuals, we know that he was a fabricant de balancier, so he was specifically producing only balances for the watches. So that eliminates him as the candidate. But this mystery has been solved effectively with the aid of this 1858 electoral list. Now, also, it should be mentioned that these watches are of pretty good quality. These were made by a mountain-based industry away from the large cities, in small communities with a small workshop. Yet the quality of these watches is really quite impressive, and they continue to keep their excellent quality in, depending upon how they were preserved, obviously, but many of the watches that Alphonse has fabricated have come down to us in very good shape, and it's a little bit of a testimony to the production methodologies that, although they were very simple in these days, the late 1840s, the 1850s, 1860s, it's incredible what they were able to produce with their hands and some rudimentary machinery, machine tools, equipment, all hand operated at this point. So, but Alphonse is an interesting watchmaker because he is the only Montandon who was signing in Travers. This was a small community, and his watches seem to have been possibly for export, and one almost wonders if the brother Louis Edouard or the father was involved also in exporting these watches, for example, to the United States. Clearly there were business contacts in the southern United States, in Louisiana area. I believe New Orleans was where Louis Edouard had been based when he was in the States. This remains a distinct possibility. But this is just a short documentary video to discuss the identification of this master and document this for posterity's sake. So this is just another note for the record, and thank you for your attention.